Hey, welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here to leadingworshipwell.com/realtalk to submit your question for a future episode. I got some great questions this week. Let's talk about it. I work at a small church with limited resources. While I play acoustic guitar with ambient pads on an amp, it is difficult to grow our worship team as there are few musicians in the congregation and not enough funds to hire out. One vocalist I have is not as strong a singer as myself, and the other vocalists are. She also doesn't sing harmony. How can I help her along while we also try to learn new songs and try to recruit new leaders simultaneously? Much prayers needed. I hear it in this question, the overwhelm of the small church worship leader. And this is not unique to you. I feel this pressure of a million different things that I need to do, and I even serve part-time at my church. So if you're a volunteer, I'm not sure, you said you work at a small church, so maybe you're full-time or part-time or whatever as well. But a lot of people in small churches are volunteers. So if you feel that struggle, what that question just talked about, then you are not alone. Most churches in the United States, at least, are under 75 people. The majority of churches are under 75 people. That means the majority of worship leaders serve in churches under 75 people and probably experience these same small church struggles as you do. So I just want to say that off the bat, you aren't alone in feeling this way. Now, what I hear in your question, judging from I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, is that you feel overwhelmed by the pressure that you feel to make your worship ministry look or function in a certain way. And so to quell the overwhelm in your head, this is something that I have to remind myself of frequently, and probably it's not just small church ministries, but probably most churches, even in larger church contexts, in their worship ministry, feel these sorts of pressures, maybe just in slightly different ways. But let's talk about, what does your worship ministry, what does your worship team, the team that you are leading, need to accomplish on Sunday? A worship leader is someone who points people to the worthiness of God and provides them with the opportunity to respond. I'll repeat that. A worship leader, a worship team full of worship leaders, your responsibility is to point people to the worthiness of God and provide them with the opportunity to respond. That's your goal. Your ultimate responsibility is not, I need to have 15 people on my worship team. I need to have a full sound. I need to learn how to implement tracks. I need to make sure that those tracks fire my pro presenter slides at just the right time so our slides finally line up with our singing whenever we sing the songs. Your responsibility is not primarily to get a full band so that you can have a full sound, as if in some way that will enhance your worship in a way that would allow you to worship in a way that you can't worship right now. Now, are there benefits to those things? Yes, but they are benefits and not essentials. And so don't stress yourself out over the benefits of these extra things that we can have in our worship ministry. Do not make them essential things. The essential thing that you need to accomplish on Sunday morning is pointing people to the worthiness of God and providing them with the opportunity to respond. Can you do that on a consistent, regular basis with the team that you have right now? Yes. 100%. Yes. Now, do we want to work towards those other things? Absolutely. So let's talk how to do that. There are a couple things that you want to do. You want to teach a vocalist how to improve their musicianship, essentially. You want to learn new songs, and you want to try to recruit new leaders. And you say you want to do it all simultaneously. I will push back on that word simultaneously. It seems to me it would be much more beneficial to you and your church to focus on one of those things right now and do it well. Because as you learn how to teach somebody to sing harmony, you will get more comfortable with that, and eventually they're going to learn how to sing harmony, and then you won't have to focus on that anymore. As you try to learn new songs, first of all, you shouldn't be introducing that many new songs at one time anyways, unless you're in like a church plant that just started. If you have a worship song repertoire in your church, a group of songs that you regularly sing of at least 30 songs, upwards of 40 songs, you have more than enough songs to serve you and your church well for the next year, probably 2 years at least. Does that mean you should never introduce a new song? No, but you don't have to introduce a new song every month, definitely not every week. If you just focused on introducing one new song every other month, you would have 6 new songs in your worship song rotation, and that might actually allow your church the time to learn the songs that you're introducing. When it comes to finding more worship team members, I've taught about this before, the 80-20 rule, and I won't explain it in detail, but essentially it says that 80% of the work in your church will be done by 20% of the people. The majority of the ministry in your church, and this obviously isn't the goal that we're shooting for. We want everybody in the church to serve in the church. But statistically speaking, 20% of the people in your church will do 80% of the work. Out of, let's say you have a church of 100 people. You said you're a small church. It might even be smaller than that. But a church of 100 people, 20 people are going to be doing the majority of the ministry in the church, statistically speaking. Out of those 20 people, only 15% of them will be musicians, which means you will have 2 to 3 people on your worship team, statistically speaking. That is the average. So if you have 50 people in your church and you only have 2 people on your worship team, you are above and beyond what is normal, statistically speaking. Obviously not the goal that we're aiming for. We want everybody to serve in the church. But statistically speaking, you are right where you need to be, and you don't need to grow your worship team. You need to figure out how to grow your church. How do you do that? Not with amazing programs and bringing people in, but by going out and sharing the gospel with people where new believers come into your church. Are you focused on that process? Because some of those new believers will be musicians who will eventually serve on your worship team. That is God's growth plan for the church. It is not necessarily we need to have an amazing kids ministry so that people who are already believers come to our church because we have an amazing kids ministry. It is not we need to have an amazing worship team because then believers who like worship music a certain way will come to our church so that they can experience worship music that certain way. It is going out and sharing the gospel, and I'm preaching to myself right now because I don't focus on this enough as I need to either. I'm talking to myself. God's growth plan for the church is sharing the good news. When the good news is shared, just like it was in Acts 2, people turn and believe. Not all of them, but some of them turn and believe. And when they turn and believe and read the Bible, they will learn from the Bible that they are encouraged to be part of a faith community called a church, the ecclesia, the called out ones who gather together on a regular basis on Sunday mornings, usually, and they'll be a part of your church. That is God's growth plan for the church. So I'm trying to, I know I'm getting like kind of off in the weeds here, but I want to give you a bigger picture than what I feel like you're focused on right now. I know there are a million things and probably a million people, or maybe not a million people because you serve in a small church, but there are several people probably pressuring you, or you feel the pressure, whether it's actually there or not, to grow your worship ministry. And I would just tell them, listen, this is a small church. We're not going to have 50 people on our worship team because we don't even have 50 people in our church. We're going to have 2 or 3 people on our worship team. And until we are serious about God's growth plan for the church of sharing the gospel with unbelievers, not just the shuffling of saints around between different churches, but until we are serious about sharing the gospel with unbelievers, our church will not grow. And so instead of focusing on the superficial things like how many people do I have on my worship team, let's focus on the core stuff first and get that right. And so I just say that to take some of the pressure off of you because I've felt this pressure before in the past as somebody who has served in a small church in the past. Of when I started serving there, it was probably 30 people and eventually it got to 100 people before I stepped away from that position. And now I serve in a church of 125 people. So I serve in small churches too. And I have felt that pressure that you're feeling, where we want our ministry to look like the bigger ministries. Whatever church you are looking at online, your church doesn't have to look that way, right? Your worship team, I should say, doesn't have to look that way because you do not serve in the same context that they serve in. So what do? We are faithful to his word, knowing that he has equipped us to serve our church through the power of his Spirit in the way that he has called us to, regardless of how many worship team members that we have. We accept that first. God wants to use you right where you are, right now, with the people that you have on your worship team, in the position that you're in your worship team, in the specific place that you're living in, your specific city, to the specific people in your church. God wants to use you where you are right now to glorify him, to point people to his worthiness and provide them with the opportunity to respond. The other things are important, but they're secondary. So focus on one of those things right now. Pour into that person on your worship team who needs help singing. Work with the musicianship of your worship team to learn new songs so that they can learn them faster, or just don't worry about introducing new songs all the time because you don't need to, unless you're a new church and you don't have many songs to pick from in the first place. Or instead of focusing on growing your worship team, focus on growing your church using God's growth plan by sharing the gospel with unbelievers. I have an interesting question, and it's a tough one. All right, so first thing to know, I go to a very small church. Oh, another small church. On a good day, our congregation would be 15 people, including children. A lot of people have left over the years, so this is just where we have been for a year now. Majority of the congregation is my pastor's family. I became the worship leader for my church about 8 months ago after our other one left. I play the piano and sing. My pastor's husband plays the drums. Pastor's son plays the guitar. The pastor does background vocals, and her sister-in-law helps lead and sing background. Now, my pastor's sister-in-law is a very negative person. She complains, she's rude, and well, I don't want to talk negative. It's just the facts. I've had someone in my congregation express that it's hard to believe and fully get into worship when she leads a song because she knows how she is outside of this. I myself have recently had conflict with her. I brought it to my pastor, and my pastor did the best she could with her advice. But at the end of the day, that's her family. Now, when we practice Sunday mornings, I always feel disrespected and left out, even as the worship leader, because my pastor has her back towards me the whole time and faces her sister-in-law, who is not the leader and does not do majority of leading the songs. And when she does sing a song, my pastor almost always compliments her on how great she did, and whenever I lead, I don't ever get complimented, which is not why I do what I do, but I'm human, and it does get to me after a while, like I'm not good enough. But my main issue is going back to said sister-in-law. How do I navigate an issue where I think she needs to step back, but I know for a fact my pastor will not agree with it? I feel like she needs to check her heart and come into worship with a better one. Now, don't get me wrong, when she leads a song, she does a great job. She speaks and prays, whereas I struggle with, because I am singing, playing the piano, giving cues. It's a lot of multitasking for me. Please help. What would you do? I sometimes think I should just step down, but I'm the only one left in my church with knowledge in music. I feel like the only thing left to do is pray, which is the most powerful. I've been at this church for 6 years and have poured my heart and soul into it. I've also thought about just leaving the church altogether, mainly because my kids are the only kids that attend regularly. But I am also finally at the place I feel like I'm supposed to be, which is leading worship, and would not enjoy starting over somewhere else. Whew. It was a long one, but I think I understand what's going on to the best of my ability. You know, when I answer these questions, I do it based on the context that you give me in your questions. So sometimes sometimes my perception could be off. I'm not there in the place. But what I hear, and this isn't uncommon, especially in smaller churches, is that, and when I say smaller churches, I mean like really small churches, is that you have one family who is primarily at the church, and then there are other people who are worshiping along with that family. Because you say your pastor is the pastor, and then your pastor's husband plays drums, and son plays this, and the sister-in-law does this. I assume the sister-in-law's husband goes there as well. So it's probably this whole big family, and then like one or two other families that go there. And that creates a very hard environment to serve in for the people who are not a part of that family, because we're always going to have biases towards our family, right? And I'm sure that your pastor has biases towards her family, which is what you're experiencing right now. And so you feel like you are being treated differently because you're not part of the family, even though the church is supposed to be a family together. We are all called to act as one family. And I would say I can't imagine leaving a church after pouring myself into it for 6 years, but I poured myself into a church for 8 years, and I left it. So I know the struggle, and I know that the decision that you feel like you need to make. Here's the guiding principle that I would give you. First of all, my first recommendation is not usually to leave a church, right? Like, it's not to leave the worship team, and it's not to leave the church. I think you have to ask the question, I'm just going to get to the root of the problem. Is this church doing things in a biblical way? Is this, by the definition of the Bible, a church? Or is it just a group of a couple of families who get together on Sundays to have what resembles a church service? Frankly, that is the question that I would be asking myself, and maybe the answer is yes, this is a church. I'm not saying that just because it's a group of families doesn't mean that it's not a church, but I want you to ask that question. Do you know what a church is meant to do biblically, and is your church fulfilling it? And if it is not fulfilling the purpose and the role of the church biblically, then it's just a group of people meeting together. I say that because you got to ask yourself the question, why have so many people left over the years? And I think it's easy when you're in leadership to be like, they just didn't understand what's going on. And it's like, okay, well, a couple people left, and then it's like, then a few more people left, and then guess what? A few more people left, and so on and so forth, until you've only got 15 people in your church, and most of those people are part of the pastor's family. I would be asking about the health of my church in that situation and thinking about it, not just what do I want it to be, what do I wish it to be, but what is happening from a biblical basis? Are we not fulfilling the purpose of the church? Is my church teaching the Bible? Is my church fulfilling the calling that God has placed on the church to, number one, glorify Him, number two, edify each other, and along with that, to go out and share the good news, the gospel, with unbelievers? Are we doing those three things, glorifying God, or are we just gathering together because it feels good and it's a good social time? Number two, are we edifying each other, everybody in the church, or is it just a family gathering where we get together and it's like a family reunion every Sunday? Number three, are we going out and sharing the gospel, or are we just, man, I really like this group of people, and honestly, I'm kind of afraid if it gets bigger because then we're going to lose that family environment that we have? I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer. These are the things that I would be thinking through if I was in your situation. Now, one more warning to you as you think through this, and I know I'm not even addressing your specific question about the pastor and the sister-in-law and so on and so forth, but I feel like there's probably bigger problems here than just that specific problem. But I want to warn you, at the end of your question, you say, I am also finally at the place I feel like I'm supposed to be, which is leading worship, and would not enjoy starting over somewhere else. If you are, and I will say this to every worship leader, if you are only at a church because it provides you the opportunity to lead worship, you need to rethink why you're at that church. We don't just pick a church because we have the opportunity to lead worship there. Now, does God want us to use our gifts to serve His church? Absolutely. In any biblical church, there should be room to use your gifts. And so if you are gifted with spiritual gifts in a way that allows you, that offers itself to worship leading, then yes, it probably makes sense for you to lead worship at your church. But we don't pick a church just because we have the opportunity to lead worship there. We pick a church because it teaches the Bible and it fulfills the commands that God has given His church in the Bible. Simple as that. If it is not fulfilling that first part, teaching the Bible, fulfilling the commands that God has given His church in the Bible, then it doesn't matter if we get to lead worship there or not, because we don't want to be a part of that church. And so if you consider looking for a new church, which I'm not telling you 100% to do, there's other things to think through. I've told you to answer a bunch of questions in this video, but if that is something you're thinking about, then don't just pick a church because you have the opportunity to lead worship there. Pick a church because it is doing the things that I've said a million times in this video already. Now, if you need help improving your worship team, if your worship team is not quite where you want it to be relationally, spiritually, or musically, I've got something for you linked down in the description below. It's called the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint. In that Worship Rehearsal Blueprint, you will find a step-by-step plan to run the perfect worship rehearsal, where you will spend time pouring into your team spiritually so that they can grow closer to God, musically so that they're ready for Sunday, and relationally so that they are built together in unity as a team and can grow closer to one another. So check out the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.